Good morning. Blessed Sabbath, everyone. It is a privilege to be back here again. And I'm happy to see some familiar faces, some new faces here as well. And I hope everyone's had a great Easter break. And those of you who have your kids back with you, well, only a couple more days and us teachers will be looking after them again. So don't you worry. Today we will talk about the story of Ruth. It's a pretty short story if you look at the amount of writing in that whole story. It only goes for about 4 chapters. And what we can learn from this story. There are many stories in the Bible that teach us great things, and something I really admire about the stories in the Bible is what they can potentially become to us as an inspiration. And in the sense that they show how good things, or better yet, great things, can happen when it seems that God's people are against all odds. In a world that is so full of darkness, God shows us that He still reigns and that He's still in control. I'll begin with verses 8 and 9 in the story of Ruth. So Ruth chapter 1, verses 8 and 9, if you'd like to turn your Bibles there. I like to integrate all my Bible verses into my notes, so I've got it all here. I don't have to do too much flicking today. But we will begin in Ruth chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. And it is a scene that's involving Naomi, Ruth, Orpah, and Ruth and Orpah were the daughters-in-law to Naomi. And they were married to their sons, Mahlon and Kilian. And let's read. If we're ready and we're at the Bible verse, we'll begin right now. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Tragically, Naomi here lost her husband and 2 of her sons, or both her sons. Broken and empty, Naomi decided to move back to Bethlehem in Judah. Yet she didn't want Orpah and Ruth being obligated to be with her. They were young. They could find another man to marry and move on with their lives. Before we move on with this story, however, curiosity took me to do some research. I'm aware that in the Hebrew culture, and I might have mentioned this in the previous sermon, is that the Hebrews love to name their child about a year after they're born. So they don't name their kids straight away. They wait a year, and they do that to observe the character of this child and see what name fits the shoe, you could say. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, means "my God is king." Agreeable, right? Naomi means "pleasant one," above all, and beauty. Also agreeable, right? Mahlon, however, who was married to Ruth, means sickness. Imagine being called something synonymous with sickness. This was Ruth's husband. Ruth means friend, or compassion for the misery of another. However, Naomi, Elimelech, and their sons were the Hebrew ones, while Ruth and Orpah were Moabite women. Let's take note of that as well. And whereas the Moabites could have been like us and named their kids in the tradition of another relative, friend, athlete, actor, actress, or it has a nice ring to it, the boys had this name for a reason. And you could see here that Elimelech had a decent name. Naomi had a pretty reasonable name too. It's questionable how Mahlon and Kilian had their names. I must confess though that I couldn't find the exact name of Kilian, who was Orpah's husband. It's overshadowed by a similar Irish name, Kilian, which means fair-headed. I don't know whether this Kilian was fair-headed. And there wasn't really a reason to follow it, thankfully. And Killian in Nigerian means kind. But once again, I don't think that would help. Maybe not. But thankfully, our focus is on Ruth in this story. And we can look at Mahlon, whose name was Sickness. And we can focus on these names because there's a beautiful coincidence with the names and how this story goes that I will reveal a little bit later. Reading on from the last part of the 9th verse, Ruth 1:9 through to 13 is where I'll be reading next. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to two sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. What have I done to deserve this? Why are you doing this to me, God? Easy to say when misfortune just seems to snowball in our lives, right? I've been there myself. I can only imagine the pain that Naomi must have had losing 3 family members quite close together. How did the in-laws respond? This is Orpah and Ruth, by the way. Let's read on. Ruth 1, verses 14 through to 18. At this they wept aloud again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, even if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So together, Ruth and Naomi head to Bethlehem. And what happens next? Let's read on. 19 through to 22. So the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. And here I find it very interesting that Naomi, the pleasant one, refuses to be known as a pleasant person now. I might have been pleasant when I left this village, but that's not me anymore. Additionally, she sees the importance of having a certain name. How often do our dark moments in our life define the way that we present ourselves? Is a question I'll ask this morning. We all know of, or even could ourselves, be scarred by the unfairness of a sinful world. It does change our perception of the world. And I myself could open up to you today that I'm not the same person as I was 5 years ago. My pleasantness has dwindled because of my experiences. I have had relationships that failed, dreams that were damaged or broken. Experiences like this make us more bitter. I can attest to that with my own life too. So what happens next? if the story ended right now, it wouldn't be a really good one, would it? Thankfully, as a salesman of that infomercial, as they say, but wait, there's more, okay? I'll now take us through to the second chapter of Ruth. So Ruth 2. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech. Elimelech was the husband of Naomi, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered the fields, and began to glean behind the harvesters. Gleaning was a process where a lot of people that didn't have those stable jobs or anything, or needed somehow to make a living, the harvest always had leftover grain. And what the gleaners would do, they would pick up whatever was left by the harvesters. They were focusing on gathering the bulk of that food that was in the fields. But there was always something to be left over. And a lot of widows would sometimes pick a field out that was run by someone, and they would pick up these leftover bits of grain, and it would accumulate to something that was decent for them to make a living off. They could even sell it if they wanted to at the local grain exchange or something. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. And you can see that he was a nice boss to even have any time for the people that worked on his fields as well. I observe here that he was actually a nice guy to come and take interest in his workers and to greet them even. "The Lord be with you, the Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please, let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So he's probably saying that she's a good worker. She's only taken one short break, but otherwise she's been doing all right. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Do not go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I have been told about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you left your father and mother and your homeland, that you come to live with the people that you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly awarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread, and dip it in wine vinegar." I'll just pause there for a second, and you can see that Boaz was a really decent guy. He wants her to be safe, he wants her to be looked after, and he wants her to also make sure she has everything that she needs in order to have the best possible working conditions. Reading on. When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves and do not reprimand her. Even pull some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. I don't know what an ephah is, but it was somewhat a decent amount. That's some homework that I didn't do, unfortunately, but it must have been a decent amount. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. And she must have been pretty like, "Oh, this is all right." Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today?" This is a fair bit of gleaning that you did, right? "Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So we know here that an ephah was a good amount because Naomi was pretty impressed with what Ruth had gathered. The name of the man I had worked with today is Boaz, she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth to work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished. And she lived with her mother-in-law. Now Boaz is the hero to Ruth here we see. A guardian redeemer, which I will explain a little bit further on. Something I really love about Boaz, though, that strikes me about him in this story, is that he already is aware of who Ruth was. And when things happen in a village, talk goes around pretty quickly. They must have been like, "Oh yeah, Naomi, the wife of Elimelech, is back in town. We haven't seen her for years. She has this in-law with her." Additionally, he valued people through the decisions they made and through their inequalities. Just see here how he approved of supporting Naomi. He was already an admirer of both Ruth and Naomi, basically because of what Ruth decided to do, which wasn't an easy decision. An unknown author once said, "When you choose to see the good in others, you end up finding the good in yourself." Here is a man that acted on this quote. Boaz, we see here that he was an admirer of those who do good. He mirrored these good deeds and paid the deeds forward. If more people acted like Ruth or Boaz, would not the world be a better place? Chapter 3. One day Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know who you are until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town will know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized, and he said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. He also said, bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out. When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. Something I like about Boaz when we read this chapter is that Boaz he liked to do things the right way. He wasn't just someone who was going to jump the queue to be a guardian redeemer. He saw that there was someone a little bit more eligible, someone more closely related as a guardian redeemer than Ruth was. And he would leave things in God's hands rather than make matters work for himself. He was already very happy that Ruth approached him to be a guardian redeemer. And a guardian redeemer was if a woman was widowed and her husband died, this woman would marry a family member in order to hold the name of the family and other things, as well as protecting the lineage of the family. It was taken care of like that, and the guardian redeemer's duty was to make sure that this widow was looked after, that she had some sort of support to live a reasonably normal life after the passing of a loved one. So what happens next is interesting as well. Chapter 4. Let's have a look. Meanwhile, this is in town. Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, sit here, and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought that I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you redeem it, do so. But if you will not tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am the next in line. I will redeem it, he said. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you will also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the guardian redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Now, in earlier days in Israel, the redemption and transfer of property became final when one person took off his sandal and gave it to another person. It was like signing a contract. So in old school times, I remember the elder generation liked to speak of a handshake being worth more than a signature. In those days, they would take off a sandal and give it to each other, and that was like a little visa transaction or something, and that's how they would finalize things. It would have been an interesting sight to see if someone was buying property of another person and they just exchanged sandals or something. Anyway, that's what they did. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself. Then he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and to all the people, today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech. Kilian and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses." Then the elders and all the people at the gate also wished, I repeated a line there, "May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah," that's what they said, "who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse and the father of David. So she was the great-grandmother of the king of Israel in future generations. 5 things we can take away from this story. Number 1, God is concerned about all people regardless of race, nationality, or status. Ruth was not a Jew, you see. She was a Moabite. And it's made clear throughout that story what Moabites in Israel were like. Even though many discriminated against her, God loved her just the same. God does not discriminate, and he loves all people just the same. Number 2, men and women are both equally important to God. God cares about men and women all the same, we see. We are all one in his eyes. While most false religions that have been constructed over the centuries often elevate men and dishonor women, Christianity is the one religion that consistently honors men and women at the same level. There is no difference in God's eyes. 3, there is no such thing as an unimportant person in God's eyes. At a surface level here, we saw that Ruth, few would see her as an important person. She was from Moab, as I said, which was a nation that originated from an incestuous encounter between Lot and one of his daughters. We can get the background of that in Genesis chapter 19, verse 30 to 36, if you want to confirm that. She was a poor widow. She was living in a foreign land away from her birth family, which is why Naomi wanted her back where she was from. Naomi knew the kind of treatment that Ruth would get. However, God saw Ruth as an important part of his plan, and he saw her as an important person especially. And her life built up in her becoming a part of the lineage of Jesus, who was a descendant of King David. God's plan typically involves using people who are considered to be underdogs or unimportant or unimpressive from man's perspective, and his strength is made perfect in our weakness, as 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9 says. Which adds us to the 4th point. God uses little things to accomplish great plans. What an amazing plan that God had for a series of little things that added up to important pieces in God's big plan. God intended for Ruth to be a part of the story of the lineage of Jesus. So he then pulled together events such as the famine Naomi's relocation to Moab, their return to Bethlehem, Boaz's bloodline, and many other events, just to ensure that Ruth could be a part of his plan. And God does the same thing in our lives as well, today even. God has a Redeemer in place who can rescue us from the devastation of our own sin. That's the fifth point. God has a Redeemer for our lives too. His name is Jesus. Boaz was a type of prophetic symbol we can see in this story of Christ and his redemptive work in our lives today. You see, we are all desolate as a result of our own sinful natures. We are empty, just as Naomi was empty and devastated after she had lost everything and returned to Judah. Our sin has rendered us empty and desolate spiritually. But who comes to take care of that? Jesus. Jesus is willing to redeem us. He wants to rescue us from the penalty of our own sins. And all we have to do to be rescued is to call on him in faith, in the belief that he can do that, and ask him to save us, as Romans 10:13 says. My hope is that you are one of his redeemed. If you are not, my hope is that you call on him right now and ask him to save you once and for all from the consequences of your sins. And here's our bonus name meaning that I was intending to mention. Do you know what the name Boaz means? It means strength. Looking at Ruth's progression, she went on from sickness, husband Mahlon means sickness, to strength, Boaz. It's a beautiful coincidence. Maybe it was meant to be. Ruth went from a sick, dead husband to a strong husband, through which Jesus was born in that lineage. Once Jesus said in Paul in 2 Corinthians 2:19, which I mentioned earlier, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And that story is an evidence that stands for Christ's claim in our lives. May this be a reminder for us that God gives us strength, no matter what lies against us. My prayer is that in the dark times that lie ahead, we can hold on to these promises, especially that his grace is sufficient for us. His power is made perfect in our weakness. We can hold on to this, and that way may we have hope. Amen.